Welcome to the Physics Almanac. In this video, we'll be continuing our proof of Kepler's laws of planetary motion using Newton's laws of motion and his law of gravity. And in this video, we're going to derive Kepler's first law. I've rated the physics level in this video as advanced. We are going to have to solve a differential equation, but it's not that bad. Let's just quickly remind ourselves, what is Kepler's first law? It states that planetary orbits are ellipses with the sun at a focus. Now, Kepler found this experimentally. He doesn't actually have an explanation as to why this law works. He just found that this model matched the data. We're now going to derive this law from Newton's law of gravitation. And we're going to start from where we left off in the previous video. If you haven't seen that video, I would recommend checking it out before you watch this one. I'll leave a link to it right now in the top right corner. So let's first recap what we found in that video. We had set up a system of two masses, m1 and m2, and we defined a random point as the origin. Mass 1 was at position r1, and mass 2 was at position r2. We then defined the relative position of these masses from the point of view of m1 by the vector r2 minus r1, and we just called it r. These two masses, according to Newton's law of gravitation, each feel a gravitational attraction to the other mass. Since these are the only forces, according to Newton's second law, they will also be equal to the mass times the acceleration for their respective masses. I'll just remind you that I'm using the dot notation to signify a time derivative, or a time rate of change. Acceleration is two time derivatives of position, so we have two dots. We then found the result that the center of mass of the system had a constant velocity, so long as the observer is in an inertial frame, meaning a frame that is not accelerating. Then we took a look at the relative motion between these two masses and combined these two force equations to get the following expression for the acceleration of vector r. Capital M here is the total mass of the system, so it's m1 plus m2. Because r is a vector, we had to be a little bit careful, and it turned out that this led to two separate equations. This coordinate phi corresponds to the angular position of the vector r. This is where we ended the previous video. We now need to solve these two equations simultaneously. And we're going to start by solving the second equation because it's equal to 0, and things that are equal to 0 are usually easier to solve. To solve this, you need to be a little bit clever. There's a number of ways you could go about it. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by multiplying this equation through by r. Now, if you squint your eyes long enough, you may recognize that the entire left-hand side of this equation is in fact a total time derivative. When you take the derivative of this quantity, r squared phi dot, you're going to have to use the product rule, meaning you're going to take the derivative of r squared while holding phi dot fixed. So that's this term here. Then we hold r squared fixed, and we take a time derivative of phi dot. Phi dot is already one time derivative, so it's just two time derivatives. That's phi double dot. If the time derivative of some quantity is 0, that quantity is not changing. So r squared phi dot must be a constant, which we're going to call little l. And you're going to see why we're calling it that in a little bit. If you're finding this video helpful so far, please take a quick second to like and subscribe, maybe share it with a few friends, and if you'd like to support the channel, there'll be a link to my Ko-fi page at the end of the video. You can also find it in the video description. Alright, so what exactly does this constant L represent? Well, if we take the quantity r times phi dot, that is equal to the perpendicular velocity, meaning the component of the velocity perpendicular to r. By definition, the arc length is the radius times the angle. So in this case, if this is dr, that's our arc length, that's going to be equal to the angle d phi times the radius, which is r. Now if we divide that by time, we're going to get d phi over dt, which is phi dot. So we have r phi dot equals the perpendicular velocity. But we don't want r phi dot, we want r squared phi dot. So that's going to be r times the perpendicular velocity. And that mathematically is equal to r cross v, where cross is the vector cross product. What the vector cross product does is it picks out the perpendicular component. So it's equal to r times the component of v that's perpendicular to r. And actually the cross product is a vector, so technically this should be the absolute value or the magnitude of r cross v. Well, r cross v is almost the definition of the angular momentum, which is r cross mv. So little l is the angular momentum divided by the mass. Which mass, you may be thinking? Well, it depends on what your reference point is. If you want to take the point of view of m1, then it just sees m2 go around it, so the mass here will be m2. And conversely, if we take the point of view of m2, then the mass here will be m1. And if we take some other arbitrary point, then it turns out the mass that goes here is something called the reduced mass. But we'll get to that in a later video. So what we've actually discovered here is that angular momentum is conserved for orbital motion, at least for a two-body system. So first equation is solved. Now we need to solve the second equation. Now we just found that we have this constant L equal to r squared phi dot, which gives us that phi dot is L over r squared. So we can substitute that in, and I'm going to bring it over to the other side of the equation. Now we have a second order differential equation that only depends on r, and we have to figure out how to solve this. What we're going to do is we're going to find a new variable that's equal to the reciprocal of r. We now need to figure out what r double dot is in terms of x. So let's start with r dot. That's going to be the time derivative of 1 over x. Well, the derivative of 1 over x is negative 1 over x squared, and we have the chain rule, so we got to now multiply by the derivative of x with respect to time. So that's x dot. Now x dot is dx over dt, which is equal to dx over d phi times d phi over dt. You can just imagine these are two fractions, and you can cancel out these two d phis. I'm going to use the prime notation to mean a derivative with respect to phi. So dot means a derivative with respect to time, and prime means a derivative with respect to phi, meaning this angle here. So this is the rate of change of x as you change this angle phi. So this term is x prime, and this term is phi dot. But we know that phi dot is L over r squared, and L over r squared is L times x squared. So this whole thing is x prime L times x squared. We can now substitute that in to get that r dot is equal to negative L x prime. Now we have to take one more derivative to get r double dot, and we're going to play the same trick. A time derivative is equal to a phi derivative times d phi dt, giving us that r double dot is equal to negative L squared x double dot. And this is still equal to our original expression, but in terms of x instead of r. We can cancel an x squared from each term, and rearranging gives us x double prime plus x equals a constant, gm over L squared. Alright, so we've now taken this second order differential equation with respect to time and turned it into a second order differential equation with respect to phi. You may be thinking, how does this help us? We still have this second order differential equation, but actually it turns out that this differential equation has a known solution. These constants a and delta depend on the initial conditions of the problem. This is a second order differential equation, so we're going to have two constants because we're integrating twice. Each time you integrate, you're going to add a constant. Now this is the solution for x. We don't want x, we want r, which is 1 over x. And I'm going to rewrite this by multiplying the top and bottom of this fraction by L squared over gm. Well, you may not recognize this, but it turns out this matches the general solution to conic sections about a focus. That is, r equals a constant divided by 1 plus another constant times cosine of phi minus delta. So let's go over real quickly what exactly is a conic section. A conic section is a slice of a cone. Generally, we think of a cone as just one half of this shape here, but actually a cone mathematically is both halves. And a conic section is what you get when you slice through this cone with a plane. So if you slice perfectly horizontally, so perpendicular to the axis of the cone, you're going to get a circle. This equation, by the way, is for the perimeter of the conic section. If you slice at an angle that's less than the angle of the cone, you're going to get an ellipse. If you slice at an angle that's exactly parallel to the angle of the cone, you get a parabola. And if you slice at an angle that's greater than the angle of the cone, you get a hyperbola. In this case, you're going to slice through both sides of the cone, giving you two sides of the hyperbola. To know which conic section we have, we first need to match this general equation for the conic section to our solution. This gives us that A times L squared over GM must equal E, and I'll get to what E represents in a second here. And L squared over GM equals the minimum radius times 1 plus E. The minimum radius corresponds to the point where these two masses are at their closest approach. The quantity E is called the eccentricity, and it's going to determine which shape we have. So this is for general orbital motion, but in this video we're solving for Kepler's laws of planetary motion. So which one of these applies to planets? Planets have repetitive orbits. They don't just come by once, meaning they have closed or bound orbits, and that's going to correspond to a circle or ellipse more generally. Now 0 is less than 1, so a circle is actually just a special case of an ellipse. Parabolas and hyperbolas are unbound. They never come back on themselves. So for planetary orbits, we have that the orbit is an ellipse, meaning that we have this general equation for a conic section with the condition that E is between 0 and 1, but not including 1. Now you can probably smell that we've pretty much arrived at Kepler's first law, but we're not quite there yet. Let's first discuss what exactly is an ellipse. An ellipse is an oval-like curve. It has two axes, a major axis and a minor axis. And I'm going to call half of the major axis, also called the semi-major axis, A. And the semi-minor axis, so half of the minor axis, I'm going to call B. The ellipse has two focus points, equidistant from the center. And the curve of the ellipse obeys the following rule. If you were to pick a point on the ellipse, the distance from that point to one focus point plus the distance from that point to the next focus point, or the other focus point, is always the same no matter where you are on the ellipse. So the way you would draw one is you could take two pins on a piece of paper and then tie a string to them and hold that string taut with your pencil and then trace around, keeping the string taut the whole time, and that'll give you an ellipse. For an ellipse, it turns out that the ratio of the minor and major axes is related to the eccentricity. The eccentricity is also related to the distance to the focus point. The distance between the focus point and the center is A times E. And for an ellipse, it is common to rewrite this general expression in terms of the semi-major axis instead of the minimum radius. So, since R represents the relative distance between these two masses, what this says is you put one of those masses at a focus point. Since we're talking about planets and the sun, let's just stick the sun at the focus point, and that means that the planet will now go around the sun along this ellipse. If we decide to take our reference angle starting from the minimum distance, meaning we're going to measure our angle relative to this distance right here, this is our minimum distance, then it turns out that delta equals 0, and phi would correspond to this angle right here. And so there we have it. Starting from Newton's laws, we've just derived Kepler's first law, stating that planetary orbits are ellipses with the sun out of focus. Or did we? If you've been paying attention, you may realize that we picked the sun to be at the focus arbitrarily. We could have picked the planet to be at the focus and had the sun go around. There's nothing in these equations that says who's moving and who's at rest. In fact, if you think about this long enough, you'll realize that you can actually pick your focus to be any point along this vector r. And from any point between these two masses, you will see each mass go around in an ellipse. The only difference will be the size of the ellipse. Everything else will be the same. So you'll have the exact same ellipse, it's just that A will be a different number, depending on which point you pick. You could just as well have picked the planet to be stationary and then the sun would go around it. So why are we saying planetary orbits are ellipses with the sun out of focus? Remember that at the time there was a big debate going on in Europe as to whether everything revolved around the sun or the earth. This shows that either point of view is perfectly valid. Yet when Kepler published his laws, it demonstrated that actually the sun is the center of the solar system. So what's going on here? Well, so far we've only looked at one planet. Let's now imagine we have another planet somewhere out here. We can now run the exact same analysis for this planet. It's going to feel a gravitational attraction to the sun, but it's also going to feel a gravitational attraction to the first planet. But in the case of the solar system, more than 99.99% of all of the mass in the solar system is in the sun. So compared to the gravitational force from the sun, the gravitational attraction between these two planets is pathetically weak. So we can ignore it. Therefore, when we run the analysis for this second planet, we can just treat it as another two-body system and ignore our first planet. And what we're going to get is the exact same result, an ellipse where we can put either the sun or this planet or any point along the line between the two planets at our focus. And if we do it for a third planet, we'll get the same result. All these ellipses will be different, but they will all have one thing in common, which is that you can, if you want, place the sun at the focus. So if you place the sun at a focus, then every planet will go around it in an ellipse. What would happen if you placed a planet at the focus? Let's say you put Earth at this focus. In that case, you would still see the sun go around you in an ellipse, and in fact, you'd also see the moon go around you in an ellipse, and you would in fact see all the planets go around you, but they wouldn't go around in an ellipse, because you wouldn't be able to do this two-body analysis between the Earth and that planet. So yes, you could place the Earth at the center of the solar system, in which case it'd be perfectly valid to say everything goes around the Earth. However, you can't say they all go around in ellipses. Only the moon and the sun will follow that rule. The other planets will follow a different rule, which, if you think about it, will correspond to the planets go around the sun in an ellipse, and then the sun goes around the Earth in an ellipse. So you'd have this coupled motion of one ellipse going about another ellipse, and mathematically, that's very complicated. It's much easier mathematically to just place the sun at a focus, and then every planet will follow the same rule, going around the sun in an ellipse. So there we have it. We've now derived Kepler's first law. It holds if you take the point of view of the sun. However, I hope I've made it clear, this does not imply the sun is at the center of the solar system. Motion is relative, and you can pick any point you want to be the center of the solar system. However, trying to figure out how things go around that point may be very difficult. So make your life easier, pick the point of view of the sun. Now everything follows the same rule. In the next video, we're going to use Newton's laws to derive Kepler's second law of planetary motion. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to see how we get Kepler's second law, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell to be notified for the release of that video and future physics videos. And if you feel so inclined and would like to support the channel, you can go to my Ko-fi page or you can leave a super thanks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.